Hey everyone, hope you're doing great today. I just wanted to take a minute to go over a new tool that we're putting together, which is kind of in its beta form right now. Eventually, we want to build this into a full-fledged implementation application. But this is our pre-implementation questionnaire, and the what we've noticed as we've been going through implementations that we're seeing very familiar patterns in the questions that we're offering and the way that we're solving those. So our goal here is to minimize the amount of time between when you sign up for CloudCard and when you are, ready to go 100%. So basically that's 0 to 60 time. And these questions I think are going to be important for that. However, just putting them out and just putting them out there like this can be a little bit confusing. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to put together a companion video that would go with these questions and walk you through it every step of the way. So that's the goal. Remember, this is kind of in the beta form right now. So we would absolutely appreciate your feedback on the process, on questions that were maybe a little confusing or hard to answer, maybe questions that might be missing. So definitely let us know if you have any feedback. We'd really appreciate it. Okay. So the first question is pretty straightforward. When would you like to be done? Right? Do you have any goals? Any hard deadlines? And of course, you can expand on these answers if you'd like to add more than just a date. You can say, well, like this is the date when our drop dead day we have to be, but we're shooting for this. It's going to make things better. Whatever. It's more of a conversation. We're just trying to get information here. Obviously, it's not a guarantee on our part, but we really want to know how we can serve you best. So that's we'd like to know what your goals are for implementation. Now, for the most part, that is not going to. If you said, "Hey, we want," we're not in a huge rush. That's not necessarily going to push you back in the queue or anything like that. We work with customers in the order that they come in. Okay. So nobody's going to jump in front of you because they said, "Oh, we want it implemented tomorrow." Okay. So don't worry about that. Just be as honest as possible there. And then if we do end up in one of those situations, we'll have a conversation with you before we did anything like that. We'd say, "Hey, would you mind?" And it would be your option. It wouldn't be something that we would just do. So, so let's see, provisioning. Okay, so provisioning is just a fancy word for creating accounts inside of CloudCard. Okay, and there's three main methods for doing that. There's several that have been listed here. Single sign-on is becoming one of the more popular at this point, and that is connecting CloudCard with your SAML2 single sign-on provider. Shibboleth is the most common that we see in the higher ed space. And what that can do is when a student logs in on your school website, then if they don't exist in CloudCard, then it will create them. If they do exist, it just logs them in. Okay, so that's kind of how single sign-on works. They actually sign in on your website, which kind of increases, the student's comfort level. The downside to single sign-on is the actual sign-on process. The alternative is which we'll discuss in B and C, is a little easier to log in and certainly just as secure. But different schools have different policies as far as single sign-on. Single sign-on makes provisioning, though, very, very, very easy. It can be a very simple process. The next two options there, we'll talk about the automated CSV import first, and then I'll talk about the manual CSV import. So the CSV refers to a comma-separated file that is basically a very common report output that would be generated from Banner, PeopleSoft, maybe your card production system, some database where you've got all your cardholder information, and that would create a report of email address, ID number, etc., whatever custom fields you might have set up in a comma-separated file. And then that could either be uploaded through our application manually, or we have a little tool that you install on a workstation or on a server, and that will just watch a folder, and it will handle that. Anytime the report system drops a file into that folder, then that will send that'll send all the imports into CloudCard automatically. So the downside of the using the CSV imports is that you do have to set up a report. Now, generally speaking, reporting is a very standard practice at most universities, and so it's not, it's pretty simple to request a report, to specify the data that you need, and to say, hey, we need it dropped in this network folder, on this schedule. So that's generally not that big of a deal. But for some schools, they prefer single sign-on. Single sign-on tends to be more work up front and less work down the road. Request access. Okay, now that's another possibility. If somebody just goes to CloudCard, you can say, hey, anybody that has a myschool.edu. So let's say William and Mary, that's my alma mater, right? So if they have a wm.edu address, then they're automatically allowed to upload a card. They just put their address in. It sends them a login link, so it's sort of a self-provisioning, self-service process. That is absolutely the easiest setup possible. It's generally not something that people use. Because there's no possibility no way for the student to set their own ID number, and in fact, we wouldn't really trust it if they did. So that's generally, but it is possible, especially if you're in a particular setup where you're keying off like the student's username or the student's email address. So that's a possibility, and there are other advanced possibilities which we'll discuss maybe in another video, but those are the main four, and really the main three. Request access is just kind of just another option. All right, so and then now this is the first question is asking what's going to be your primary. Okay, what's your primary way to provision users? The second question is what other provisioning processes will you use now, and what are the use cases in which you're going to use those? I'll give you a great example. Okay, a lot of schools will use either manual or automated CSV import because they want to control when students get the email invitation. They want that email invitation to go out and to prompt students to come into the application, and so they like to use that process, one of those two processes. Whereas with single sign-on, you have to use some other, external, you have to set up maybe a campaign or something like that in your own email system to send out requests to get them into via single sign-on. So if you're provisioning through single sign-on, okay, so they'll provision through the CSV import, but then they'll authenticate through single sign-on, right? And we'll talk about authentication in a minute. So they provision, but then they don't want single sign-on to insert users, and they don't want single sign-on to update users. They just want them to authenticate. So they add them to CloudCard using the CSV import, but sometimes, in some cases, for some part of the population, they might want to, allow imports. And I give a very recent one that we did was a school where they're using the automated CSV import for the bulk of their imports and their provisioning, but for faculty and staff, they didn't want to use that process. They wanted them to just be provisioned through single sign-on. So that's a secondary process, and it's just for faculty and staff. And in that case, there's specific defaults that are set. So you can use more than one provisioning process. So it's really about figure out what's going to be the best for you, and then maybe there's a gap, where we need a where one of the other processes would work well. So that's the idea there with question number 2. And then, of course, 2B is in what situations would you be using those processes? Moving on down here to section 3. What custom fields will your cardholders have? There's several to select from, full name, first name, last name. I generally, if you can report on it and get it, I generally recommend full name as opposed to first name or last name. simply because one, it takes up less space on the screen, which is important. There's not a ton of space. And two, it's easier to search. I could put, J wildcard Smith to get, to find John Smith. But if I have the Johns and the Smiths separately, it's a little more difficult to search that way. So full name tends to be a better way to go, as long as you can get it. And I've yet to run into a school that couldn't when they really wanted it. But I recommend that one. It's a good one. And there's lots of situations where you would want to be filtering to search for a student based on their name. Other things that come in campus, what orientation date or group they're in, any notes. I call notes the junk drawer. And it's really just kind of, we're not sure what we're going to use this for. But if you've only got one, let's say you're only using full name, then hey, throw notes on there too, because you never know what else you might want. But you really don't want more than 3. Okay, and the three even is already kind of getting a little crowded. So just pick 2, maybe 3. And these fields are not fields the student fills out. Okay, that's key. They are not fields that the student fills out. They're fields that get provisioned from your either through single sign-on or through your bulk import, but they don't get updated by the students, and they don't come back, right? Because since they've come from you, there's no need to send them back. They're just useful in the application for filtering and things like that. So let's say you want to process everybody on North Campus all at the same time. Well, you can say filter, just show me North Campus, and then you can go ahead and approve all of those and download those and maybe do a batch import or whatever. Or I just want to do this orientation group. Okay, enough of custom fields. That's what they're there for. So select some custom fields. Of course, there's an other if there's something special that you guys want. Authentication, we talked a little bit about that before. Authentication basically says how do people log in to the cloud to CloudCard, and really the question here is, are you going to use single sign-on? Okay, because that's the big setup process. All the other authentication scheme uses the login links that CloudCard sends out, these super secure login tokens, and it's super convenient, super easy. That was one of our early on innovations. But in some situations, depending on IT policy or whatever, there's or just overall strategy. The desire is to bring students in through single sign-on. If that's the case, we absolutely support and enjoy working with schools with single sign-on. So there's some questions about that. Are you going to use single sign-on? Do you want to create new users? Do you want to be able to update users with single sign-on? In the case of the use case I described before, where there's a school that was primarily using CSV Import to provision their students, but then they also wanted to allow faculty and staff to come in and be provisioned through single sign-on. In that case, they're allowing the creation of new users, right, which would be a yes to number 2, but they're not allowing the update, okay, because that prevents single sign-on from changing anything that they put in through the bulk CSV, okay? So it really, when you just, as you're thinking through the strategy, there's lots of ways that we can make it work for you guys. And then also, please describe the SAML attributes that you would like mapped. This is where you really have to get IT involved, okay? We actually need to know what the technical name of those attributes are. They can actually just take a SAML, the values directly from a SAML assertion. And we can work with them to figure that out if you're having any difficulty there. But really, a lot of times you'll see something like a crazy, ORNUID number, but anyway, your IT folks should know what that is if they're using single sign-on. Okay, and then the URL for their metadata. Again, that's something you'll have to get from IT. And if there's not a URL for the metadata and they just want to send the metadata over to us, that's fine. Just attach it with this, or just email it to us separately. That's totally fine. Finally, custom URL. Oh, actually, we got 2 more things. Custom URL. Are you going to use a custom URL? Again, I'll go back to my alma mater, William & Mary. So if you had maybe photo.wm.edu instead of wm.onlinephotosubmission.com, right? Onlinephotosubmission.com is our domain. So if you're not using a custom URL, then you're going to use, you'll just be using www.onlinephotosubmission.com. But if you want to use your own, we recommend Photo. It's a good one. People don't forget it. Photo.wm.edu, photo.odu.edu, photo.pacific.edu, whatever. Or if there's something else that you want to use, maybe photos are being used for something, we can really do whatever, my ID photo dot myschool.edu, whatever, or photo upload dot, anyway, you got it. Just fill that out if you are planning on using a custom URL. And then we also need to know the contact information for the person who will approve the SSL certificate, right? So when you look on, in fact, you can see it here on the screen, this little lock and the HTTPS, okay? That comes from a technology called Secure Socket Layer, right? And it requires a certificate, and that basically says, hey, you can trust this site, right? Well, in order for us to host CloudCard using one of your domains, we need approval from somebody who's authorized to do that, okay? Somebody who is basically an administrator for your domain. And so we just need the name and email information for that, for who could approve that SSL certificate. And then finally, how do you plan to download photos? Okay. The simplest is the one that was probably demonstrated in the demo that you got, which is the manual zip download. That works for some schools. Most schools are automating it in one way, shape, or form using our CloudCard photo downloader. So if you do plan on automating it, how do you want to, where do the photos need to go, right? Are they going to go into some file on a file system, like put it in a specific directory and call it ID number.jpg, or do you want to put them into, and we list off several different, card systems here: Seaboard, CS Gold, Odyssey, Transact, True Credential, IDWorks, some other database, or into a different database. Some schools have their own custom database that's located in Banner or PeopleSoft or somewhere else, or something else. Okay, feel free to fill it in. Okay, but the big question here is: are you going to use the manual downloader, or are you going to use CloudCard Photo Downloader, or are you going to call have an IT project that interacts with our API externally? We've got some customers that do that, where they take control of downloading the photos and interacting with our API. And if that was the case, you would fill that out here in section I. But if you are going to use the photo downloader, then give us some idea of where it needs to go, because that'll help us in just building the strategy for this implementation. So that's pretty much it. After that, we'll have some action items, and we'll go over that. Those action items will be based off of your answers to this questionnaire. So once you've got the questionnaire filled out, then we will get an implementation date, like a kickoff date, scheduled. And our goal is to absolutely minimize the amount of time, date-wise, between whenever that kickoff date is and when you guys reach, that 0 to 60 date, when you guys are moving full speed, submitting photos. Well, thanks. I appreciate your attention today. I know this has been sort of a longer video. I hope it was helpful. And you guys, good luck. And I'm really excited to be working with you guys on CloudCard.